All right, good evening. I have to say, out of all the lectures that we've hosted here, which for me hosting them now is I think almost in the hundreds in this new building, this is probably the chattiest group that we've had. And I love to start on that note to say welcome. Thank you everybody for being here. We are really in the heart of off-season, and I got a lot of, it's off-season, who's gonna come? The community wants to come, so thank you for being here. My name is Michelle December. I'm the Chief Program Officer here at the Aspen Art Museum. It's such an honor to be hosting this series, which is called the Legacy Series. We've put this together, as you might have heard me do this kind of funny math joke, 5 plus 15 equals 40. Now, you might be like me and bad at math, but that's not why we say this equation exists in our thinking this year. It's because we are celebrating 5 years in this new building, 15 years of hosting Art Crush, and 40 years since we were founded as an institution. So we took that time to really think about how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So the math doesn't quite add up because the magic of creating an institution and being with art actually requires a lot more pieces. It requires community, it requires people, it requires effort, and in my opinion, it requires magic. So we put together this series kind of in the ramp up and lead up to look back and think of people who have made a significant contribution to our local, state, and national kind of arts landscape, just as a sort of peak for us to think about the way that small, well, probably Dick would say that it was no small action in 1976, but how these gestures that we do, these efforts that we make can have a long-lasting impact. And so tonight, at the heart of this series, we wanted to really come back to the founding of this institution. So we've invited Richard Carter to be here to talk about his experience. We're also tying this to part of the Bauhaus 100 Aspen project. So we have Lissa Ballinger here. I'll give a quick bio for both of them. But this series is wrapping up on May 30th with Adam Lerner, who's the outgoing director of the MCA Denver. So that will be the last lecture, and then we're ramping up to a big party on August 10th from 5 p.m., 24 hours straight of something nonstop until 5 p.m. on August 11th of this year. If you'll remember, that's how we had our opening party for this building. So we invite you to come back, stay tuned. We're always staying busy, and we're so grateful that you're here tonight. We're also grateful to the Questrom Education Fund for making this program free, along with support from the Laffey-McHugh Foundation. So without further ado, I'd like to tell you how tonight will kind of be set up. These two have put a lot of effort and thought into presenting a very rich and important history to not only Aspen, but this place in particular. I'm grateful because I have a job thanks to Dick. And so we'll have a presentation for about 30 minutes from the two of them or so, give or take, and then we'll open it up to conversation from the audience, since I'm sure that there's a lot of contributions to be made from here as well. So I think probably everybody in here knows both of these two, but it's my honor to give a brief introduction. Lissa Ballinger has worked in the art world for over 20 years. She founded her own Aspen-based art advisory firm, Walnut 5, in 2010. She works as an advisor, serves as the curator for the Aspen Institute's art collection and galleries, and is the Bauhaus 100 Aspen program manager. She's doing, I'm sure everyone knows, has done a tremendous effort to really bring a celebration for the centennial of the Bauhaus. Richard Carter, who is directly to my right, will share his story tonight, giving great insight, and he will trace his time working in Herbert Bayer's Aspen studio, as well as being a founding member of the Aspen Center for Visual Arts, which was the institution that came to be where we all sit today. So please join me in welcoming these two beautiful people.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I feel so lucky to be with Dick this evening and to be speaking about this really important time in the history of Aspen. And while Michelle was just presenting that, I think Dick had a little awareness of, wow, this was 40 years ago. And just so all of you know, I'm only 44, so that's about the time when I was born. But it's a really exciting presentation that you're about to see. I just want to tie it into the Bauhaus 100 Aspen celebration that's happening and remind everyone, if you don't already know, that you must come to the Bauhaus Ball. Yes? Yes. Okay. Thank you. There are a couple claps in there. So the Bauhaus Ball is on June 6th, Thursday, June 6th. It's a free community event. We are trying to bring the weird back to Aspen in every single way, in a way that it hasn't happened for a long time. Yes, exactly, David. It's going to be a really bizarre, hopefully whimsical evening, and that we really hope that you will all come. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Dick, and then I'm just going to interrupt every now and then, just saying.
Please do. Thanks for coming, everybody. I hope this is informative. I really learned a lot about myself putting this thing together, looking back at the early 70s when I first came here. And so it's been a real trip down memory lane, and I'm going to share it with you. I hope you enjoy it. So I moved here from New Jersey, which I don't know what you think of that move, but I thought it was a pretty good move. And when I grew up, I was exposed to contemporary art at a very early age. My brother was at the School of Visual Arts, and I was like in the 8th grade, and so he would take me to the Met, to the Modern, to the Whitney, and I just became sort of knowledgeable at a very young age about painting in particular. So it was in my blood early. There were things that happened that I went to Villanova University for engineering, oddly enough, and I really sucked at that, so I didn't last more than a semester. And then I just took general courses, and I really taught myself about art by visiting the library. I spent hours and hours in the library reading about art, and I just started painting on my own. After I graduated, I would go to New York and, see the shows there. And there was a show in 1970 at the Met, organized by Henry Galzaller, that was called the New York School 1940-1970. And it was just a knockout, amazing show. And it just that was it. That was sort of the kicker that made me say, I'm going to be a painter. The power of the work in that show was just palpable. And I thought, that's what I want to do.
You want to show those images, don't you?
Well, no, not yet.
Okay, sorry.
I just want to start here because this is me in 1969, 1970, and this is my first exhibition. This was in Fort Lee, New Jersey, at a little gallery, and when I showed this guy my work, he was really enthused, and we did a show, and I was like 23 years old, and he mentioned that my work sort of resembled Muhuali Nagy, which when we get into the Bauhaus part, you'll know who he is. And that sort of was like, it was a good reference for me to think like maybe I was doing something that had some reference to anything. So this was that show. That was my wife, Claudette, at the time, 21 years old. This is the kind of work I was doing in New Jersey before I got out here. We were doing these constructions, geometric constructions.
Dick, was it a big deal for you to get a show at this time?
Actually, with that guy, it was very easy. I just walked in, I started a conversation. He wanted to know what I was doing. So
that's not quite how it works these days.
No, it was, well, I've been very lucky with getting shows. I've had a lot of gallery representation until recently. And so it's been lucky. But see, so these are some of the works I was doing in Weehawken, New Jersey before we moved to Colorado. And I was influenced by people like this, Charles Shearler, Charles Demuth, the precisionist people. This was part of the stuff I talked about at that Geldzahler show, 1940-1970 New York School. And, I just found these people to be overwhelmingly powerful. And it all influenced me. I was just like a bucket of water just absorbing everything. One day I came home from work, and my wife was standing at the top of the steps, and she said, I gave notice on the apartment, I quit my job, we're moving to Aspen. And this is what arrived in Aspen, that U-Haul. We didn't know any better, we drove that over Independence Pass. That was ridiculous. So when I first got here, this was the kind of stuff I was doing. I had a barn in the West End. I was just, just learning color. I was really just experimenting, but clearly in a geometric vein. And so at some point...
Wait, go back. Because I just want to reiterate that this is before Dick had any, especially here, that had any contact with Herbert Bayer. Didn't even know who Herbert Bayer was knew about the Bauhaus, right? You'd studied it just in the library, not in school formally. Right. And it's just interesting to see where you intersected even before you had met Bayer.
Right. So like I said, this is the work I was doing. We had just moved here. We started a family. I mean, it was really kind of chaotic here. And I was out looking at a gallery one day. I was working construction. I was out working at a gallery looking at a gallery one day, and I met somebody from the Aspen Times who said, "Oh, you're a painter. You should talk to Herbert Bayer. His assistant just moved to California. He's dying to get an assistant." And I literally said, "Who's Herbert Bayer?" And you know, she told me a little bit, and I went to the library, and it was like, holy shit, it's the Bauhaus, you know. So I interviewed with him a couple times, and he hired me, and I started with Herbert. And I guess all you know, I don't have to tell you anything about Herbert Bayer, I don't think, or Bauhaus. I'm hoping you all know about those things. But
and if you do want to know more, you can always come on my tour at the Aspen Institute, which I happen to be having tomorrow at 11 a.m.
And by the way, this is a poster Bayer did for the 50th anniversary of the Bauhaus, 50 years ago, obviously. And this was some stuff that I saw of Bayer's. This is my favorite picture of Bayer. It's a self-portrait he did when he was doing these photo montages in the 30s. Obviously a more recent picture of him in his studio. This is probably 1960. And so I got the job. I said to him, you know, I'm not formally trained. I didn't go to art school. I'm self-trained. He said, that's fine. You'll learn everything you need to know by working with us. So this was the studio up on Red Mountain. This was his studio. All these windows on the right there looked out over Ajax. The building was way tucked back in the meadow. He had a real problem with people that built out on the ridge. Look at Red Mountain today. That's the house. It was a beautiful little Bauhaus model, and it was torn down once they left the valley.
And if you enter the Aspen Institute Reception Center right now, when you enter, there's a watercolor by Bayer called Studio in Winter, which is actually, if you see it now, you'll see it's this building with Bauhaus colors.
Right. So, so this is up at the top of the meadow in Red Mountain. There's really nothing above it. And so I'm driving up and down, you know, every day to the studio for lunch and back up later. And so my job was initially painting. This is the kind of work that he was doing when we met. And so he would give me something like this, a small acrylic study, and he would illustrate the colors, and he would want to do this in a size, let's say 8 feet by 8 feet, 6 feet by 6 feet, whatever size. So I would stretch the canvas, prime the canvas, lay the painting out, and then mix the paint, and I would start painting it. So, and a painting like this was actually quite difficult because this is a Fibonacci curve. I don't know if you're familiar with Fibonacci. He was a 12th century monk who didn't discover but presented this geometric progression that goes like this. You add 1 to 2, you get 3. You add 3 to 2, you get 5. You get 5 to 3, you get 8. It's that kind of progression. And basically, this is just a graph of that geometric progression. So, you know, this is what I walked into, you know, start here. So it's another painting I did for him. I tried to find the paintings that I worked on, some of them anyway. You know, really difficult. These color progressions were a nightmare. You had to mix all the paint in a batch, so you could do a sample and then the final thing would look like that. A double Fibonacci curve. This is a black and white grayscale Fibonacci.
Dick, can you speak to, a lot of people have seen some of these pieces as screen prints.
Right.
So can you talk about how, I think I just lost my mic, how you go from a painting to a screen print?
Well, I'll get to this with him, but the thing about working for Bayer was he did everything. He considered himself a painter, but really his notoriety was when he was at the Bauhaus. He ran the typographic and commercial art kind of side of it. And he was really extremely innovative. After he left the Bauhaus, for example, he went to work at an ad agency in Germany, and he really was associated with commercial art for a long time before he came to the States. And I think most people would consider him to be a super pioneer in the layout of advertising, and he designed a thing called the universal font, which I'll show you a picture of. It was just a few more paintings, these color progressions. This is all stuff I worked on, so it was you know, he would come into the studio at some point, and if a color was wrong, you had to change it. This was a tapestry eventually. We did a lot of work on tapestries. I would do the maquette, and we'd send them off to a weaver in either Germany or, or Puerto Rico. And then this is a piece that I own that he gave me, but it's just another example of this is what he would give me, and then we would turn this into a painting of whatever size. And just what typical assistant's job for an artist. Some people go, well, what, he signs them then? I go, well, that's how it works, man. If you're an artist of any repute or success, you're going to have an assistant, and it just makes your life easier. And it's just the way it is. It's always been that way. Leonardo had assistants. Again, another Fibonacci piece. This was based on his visits to Tangier, where he had a home. And then this is the work that, as I was leaving him in 1978.
Wait, before you go there.
Yeah.
Can you back up? Did you enjoy doing these?
Yeah. So, you know, at this point, my life was 9 o'clock in the morning, I'd show up there, come down for lunch, go back up, come down at 5 or 6. And by the way, he would be there in the morning when I got there, and he would be there when I left at night. He was 70 years old when I started working for him. And, you know, I mean, for me, it was just watching how a very successful artist runs his day. I mean, it was nonstop. It was everything to him. And not just painting, but I'll show you other things that he did. He was involved heavily with Atlantic Richfield and Bob Anderson, who lived here and was sort of his sponsor, made him the head art consultant and design consultant for Atlantic Richfield. And that just dumped so much work into the studio. We were designing carpets, tapestries, murals, sculpture for outside. I mean, it was overwhelming. And then this was some of his later work this is like the last thing I remember working on. And then he had a heart attack when he was in Zurich for a show at Marlborough. And so he had to stay in Europe for 3 months. And then the Bayers were very thrifty people. I would get sketches. He would send me a letter, right? And it would be on that airmail tissue and colored pencil. And they would worry about the postage. It really killed me. You're German. But he was, anyway. So, but this was when he moved. I went out a few times over the next couple of years. He came back here in the summer. And so this is when my association with him was waning. And this is kind of the work he did after, which I think is terrific. This is another example of a sketch that you would use to lay out a painting that hopefully would wind up looking like that.
And these are all much larger scale canvases.
These are all
80 by 80.
6 by 6 feet, yeah, 80 by 80, yes. They're big canvases. And I actually think this work he did after he got to California was his best work ever.
That piece is actually in Plato's Restaurant.
Yeah, that's right. So other things we did, I mean, the first year I was there, he did a retrospect at the Denver Art Museum, and, you know, I was elected to go down and oversee the installation. I mean, I'd only been there a year. And I built this model. This is actually a cover of that show's catalog, and this was built, you know, where these tubes were like 10 feet tall, and it was a walk-through sculpture, and you know, so there were things like that you did also. You designed sculpture. This is a sculpture that is in LA between the former Arco Tower and the Bank of America. It's in this beautiful black granite pool. So there were projects like this. You'd have to do drawings of these things, and you know, it just kept coming at you. And this is a mural. The first time I ever went to California, I went out to work on this mural. We did it in a set shop, and this was in the 51st floor of the Arco building. And it's still there today. There's a wall in front of it. They built a wall to hide it. It's still there. It's details of it.
And it's three-dimensional, right?
That's right. It's wooden slats, and you know, it's kind of like, and about 40 feet by 20. And this was the universal font that he designed. He didn't use uppercase letters. He thought they were superficial. And this was you know, another thing. He did this for Container Corporation. He designed an atlas. What was the actual title of the atlas?
The World Geographic Atlas.
Yeah, and it was phenomenal. I mean, it added so much more kinds of material and research that had to be done on the pages of each atlas. It's a beautiful. I have a pristine copy of this book. It's fantastic. And the other thing he did in advertising, which I think was one of his best things, was this is for Container Corporation of America. It was Great Ideas of Western Man series. And what they would do is they would take an image, a pop image, a painting, whatever, and they would put with it a poet's remarks or a piece of literature. And I want to read this one because this is really telling.
That's not actually true. Can I back that up?
Yeah, go.
Okay. So it was actually a project in collaboration with Herbert Bayer and Elizabeth Pepke, and they used these quotes from Mortimer Adler's great books, and then they paired them with contemporary artists. So it was really important. These were all living artists, and the artists had to create a piece of artwork that was specifically related to, yes, to the quote.
But,
now you can read.
But this is this is a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. He says, "The things that will destroy America are prosperity at any price, peace at any price, safety first instead of duty first, and love of soft living and the get-rich-quick theory of life." That was in 1917.
Darn
Sound
it.
familiar? Yeah. Moving on. Oh, and then this just happens to be the favorite thing he ever did, I think. It's a small watercolor. It's actually in color. I couldn't find another picture of it. Sorry. It's called Tinder Picture E. Just love that title. And I loved when he just did this loose drawing. And then this is a really meaningful piece to me. This was a illustration he did of his, I guess you could call it his motto, which was head, heart, and hand, which was his advice to anybody who wanted to do creative work, is that if you took advantage of those three parts of your psyche, you would hopefully be successful.
I have never seen this before.
Really?
Really.
That's saying something.
I know. Where did you find this? I don't believe you.
I have
I'm just kidding.
I have every book on the guy. I don't know what's in all
Wow.
the books.
That's amazing.
Fabulous piece, yeah. And then a couple of photo collages that he did in the 30s where he did a lot of this stuff for advertising, but he did a great series. You might be familiar with the photo month. This is probably what he's best known for now, I would say, when you say his photos.
Only
photography.
only because it's gone for the most amount of money of any of his pieces at auction.
Right, yeah.
That and the self-portrait.
So, I worked for him from 1972, April, for about 5 years straight. And then when he got sick and went to Montecito, he would come back in the summer, and then I'd go out for special projects. And so it was an incredible amount of work working for him that was just thrown at you. Like I said, I had no formal training as an artist. It was just, here, do this, and figure out how to do it. And it just made me so self-sufficient as an artist, I think, for myself, that I'm just sort of not afraid to tackle anything, and whether that's in art or in life. So I feel like that I got a lot of that rubbed off on that job, and his work ethic was powerful. He really, put everything into it, and also was not afraid to take a project. He complained a lot, but he also accomplished a lot. He was prolific, in all media and a wide-ranging kind of projects. So one thing that he was involved in was the Aspen community. He, you go out to the campus out there, and from the buildings to the earth mounds to just the general design of it, the Wheeler Opera House. Help me, what else? I mean, just lots of stuff in town.
Do you want me to get started?
Fencing, yes, sure.
The sun deck atop of Aspen Mountain
Right.
as well, and there's many houses.
Yeah.
And he did lots of restoration on some buildings in Aspen. We're looking at historical society members as well. But yeah.
Yeah, so he's here.
He also was very integral, sorry, just re-interrupted you, into the the planning of Aspen, which is,
Yeah,
pardon me? And the design conference.
yeah, and on and on. So some of that rubbed off on me too. I mean, I saw this guy, concerned about his community and doing things about his community and being involved. And that definitely had an effect on me because it just, I didn't know anybody else like that. I had been working in construction, and the guys I was working with were, the community thing was at the Red Onion after work. So this is a picture of me in 1973 while I'm working for him. And this is the kind of work I was doing. While I worked for him, I wasn't really influenced subject-wise by him. The work he did didn't really influence what I wanted to do. Yes, geometric, but very different. And so these are some of the paintings I was working on at the time. I worked for him in 1973. And incidentally, these paintings will be shown down at the Launchpad in June as part of the Bauhaus celebration. I thought it'd be cool to dig these things out of storage. There's unfortunately a lot of them in storage. And do a show of this kind of work. So that'll be in June at the Launchpad. I hope you can see that. And so these are all about 4x4. They're interesting to me because they're the first time I used masking tape as a material on the canvas as opposed to just being a tool. And that is something that I've continued to do for up till today, really, on and off. So this is that series that'll be done at the Launchpad, and these paintings haven't been anywhere since right around that time, so it's kind of interesting. But they look pretty contemporary, I think. I mean, I really like them. And we're doing a catalog on it. Tim Brown is writing an essay on it, and that'll be at the Launchpad show. Another picture of me. And this gets to more about the Bauhaus, in particular, the things about the Bauhaus that influenced me. Like I said, I learned so much at his studio because he had all the books, the color theory, the Eiten books, Albers, you name it. And so I was picking up a lot of information, learning how I wanted to paint. I'd paint up there all day long. I'd come home, I'd have dinner, I'd go to my barn in the West End, and I'd paint until, 2 o'clock in the morning. So it was pretty intense and hard not to learn doing that. But so the people at the Bauhaus who did influence me would be Kandinsky, for one, and for a simple reason that his geometry comes from a fairly romantic place, I think. Yes, it's kind of, it's kind of rigid in some ways, but it's fanciful, and it's, if you compare it to, say, Kazimir Malevich or somebody like that, or even Muhuali Nagy, who we'll see in a minute, I think you could call it romantic. So that was an influence. And then this guy, I love this guy. This is Muhuali Nagy, and Laszlo Muhuali Nagy, and this is a self-portrait. And these are some of his works from the 20s up till about the early 40s. That just go through them because these were I just love this guy's work. He had a big retrospect that traveled all over the world. 3 years ago, I saw it in LA. It was just magical, really magical. And this just proves that he and Robert McNamara were probably never seen in the same place. Right? I mean, geez. Okay, so I go up to that studio every day. I come down for lunch, I go back up after, work in the afternoon, come back. And I pass this building every day. And I would go in there occasionally to pay my Holy Cross bill, and this thing just blew me away. I mean, this was a fantastic building. The property was great, several acres along the Roaring Fork. Really cool interior at the time, too. A lot of transformers and an old Dodge and somebody's Skidoo. And, but I would go in there, I'd just wet my pants. Man, this could be something so great. And, so that's in my mind. This place is just in my mind. And about this time, the city took possession of this building, the old hospital, and the Wheeler Opera House. And they set about to nominate committees to decide what to do with each building. So these three, that's Diane Louis on the left, who is no longer with us, myself, and Missy Thorne, who's sitting right here. The three musketeers who started the art museum. And so we decided we would put a committee together and pack it with artist-type people, because there were other things that people wanted to do in there, like a teen center or a farmer's market or some other thing that wouldn't work. And been through all that. So we worked on this thing for 3 years, man. It was this kind of shit all the time. Meetings. There's Missy and Diane, Nick DeWolf. I think Tom Isaacs is in that picture. And we put together a great board and put together a great financial and architectural plan for the building. And, you know, we went to the city council after a lot of negatives from the government. I mean, I got some really wacky comments when I would go to commissioners and ask them, you know, what do you think? This would be great. You guys would support this, right? And my favorite retort was, you know, I can't see the government giving another nickel for the Red Mountain crowd to have a cocktail party. And I was like, well, that's not what this is, you know? And, but that was the attitude, and, you know, among people that I considered my friends, actually. So, you know, it was a slog, man, getting the county and the city, mainly the city, to approve, but they did. And they approved the construction budget. They approved the maintenance of the building for the 99-year lease that we got from them. Honestly, it was astonishing. I don't know that that could happen here today in this town. It was just very little opposition from the public. It was just the government that was kind of pain in the ass. So this is what it looked like when it was under construction. Very exciting. And then this guy came along. We hired him from Chicago. That's Philip Yenowin, and he had been at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago as the head of education. He later went on to the Modern as head of education. He's a very talented director and a very smart guy, and a big believer in art as a way to educate people. And so he came on, and
You have to tell the story of how you got him to come.
how we got him to come?
Yes. You had him up here. He came to a party.
Yeah. Well, it was 1975 or so. You know what the town was like then. It was wild. And he came out and he fit right in. Let me just say that.
That is the PG version.
Yeah.
Use your imagination.
Yeah, I mean, you know everything that went on then. But he was fantastic. He brought people together. I remember sitting with him on the porch of the gallery across from Little Annie's, and his question was like, how do I get those people? How do I get the Little Annie's people to come to the museum? You know, like that was he was really a community-minded guy and very effective, and everybody loved him. And so he was the first director at the museum. And, gotta look at my notes. And so he got here, we got the building built, and then I just wanted to go through a couple of things. Like the first show that he did was called Modern American Portraits, or American Portraits. And I mean, just listen to some people in the show. This was pretty great. So Diane Arbus, Avedon, Chuck Close, de Kooning, Lichtenstein, Warhol, Mapplethorpe, Jasper Johns, Oldenburg, Alice Neal, Jim Dine, Marisol Arneson, Rauschenberg, and others, but also, importantly, Franz Berko, Chris Cassette, Michael Cleverly, and Robin Moles. So there was a local element because they were appropriate for that show. And all through our tenure there, we always felt like, you know, if you were in the groove with what we were doing, then you should be included. That's how that worked. And and then just the list beyond that, I mean, it was just incredible. Just a couple I want to mention. This is like the list of shows. If you really want to get a good idea of this, Dean Sobel, who was a director, I guess in the early 90s, put together a book on the 21st anniversary of the Art Museum. And it's wonderful. I mean, I had to use it extensively on this. In fact, some of these pictures are from it because it's just completely encyclopedic about the evolution of it and all the shows that were in it. I won't read this list, but it's just an incredible list of shows that went through that building. Okay. Good, actually. We're doing good. I don't think this excuse me for a minute. All right. Roger Moyer is in the room. Jules Auger, Harry Auger. We had a party while the building was being built. no holding us down. Here's the poster from the American Portrait Show. This was a show that Phil Holstein, Don Erdman, and Tony Berlant put together from their collections of Southwest American Indian objects. Castelli's work, Rocher. And then there was this. This was excellent.
Think Bauhaus Ball.
Yeah, think Bauhaus Ball. So I had a friend who started showing here at the gallery I was with, the Gargoyle, Sal Pecoraro, and he was telling me about the artist art cart race they did in Golden Gate Park. And I thought, we got hills. And so we got Dee Dee Brinkman to produce this, and this went on for 4 years. It was artists making cars that probably took them out of their studios forever, you know. There's Harry Teague, he was my nemesis. Still is. No, his car was the Lanedo log. It was a 3-wheel log from Lanedo, obviously, and he would lay down head first on it, and it had a big spike on the front. That's Harry. And we would always race in the finals, and he would always beat me, that's I have to say. He cheated, though. And then this was actually the first race. That's me on the left in that little car. And look at the crowd. I mean, it was really a fun thing. And then you'd go back to the museum afterwards, and there'd be a Calcutta auctioning off the cars. Hunter Thompson would hold court. It was just, it was fantastic. It really was.
And this was the hill coming down from 1A, right?
Yeah. Just get in your car.
Has some.
Get in your car and coast down 1A to Main Street, and you'll see. And you know,
Those people are brave standing there.
There were cars that lost their brakes and go into the crowd, and I mean, it was fun. It was really great. And this is me around that time in my studio, still smoking cigars. So just a quick trip from there to here for me. I'm just going to blitz through these, but this is the kind of work that resulted from all this other stuff happening. I mean, the 70s were really a cyclone of events happening between having a family, moving here, doing the museum, doing Bayer, learning about the Bauhaus, and just every other goddamn thing that went on in town that you couldn't keep up with. So this will just go from the 70s up today. I'm just going to go through, and I'm still using masking tape today. This was a series I did that was influenced by the landscape in the West, and then more traditional geometric work. These are from the 90s. Still very geometric, but I added my own kind of romantic notion to it because they all have a light source and they're sort of set up in these tableaus. And then I became so interested in so many different kinds of science around the year 2000, I decided to paint the entire night sky. So this is one constellation, Scorpio, but I did 88 paintings for 3 years of some of them were 8 feet by 4 feet, some of them are just like this one, 2 feet. So I'm just following my, what I learned from Bayer, really, just, your work looks like something, and people want you to keep doing what it looks like. And I found that at some point I had to break out of that. And so, at this point, I'm not afraid to do any kind of thing. These are drawings. I spent 2 years just drawing particle physics images. And then night sky. These are all graphite drawings, very large, of icebergs in the night sky. Lightning as a subject, years in this stuff. And then fire in 2010, the world was on fire, if you remember, kind of like last year. And I did a whole thing at David Floria's gallery, thanks David, on fire. And you worked there then too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I just finished this series on mandalas in 2017, and these are shown pretty extensively. This were my take on taking a historic form and just using it for my own interpretations in a modern way. And then this is what I'm doing now. I've sort of broken up the geometry. I'm doing a series that's much more narrative. It's based on instability and chaos that I think everybody in this room probably feels about the way the world is right now. It's just impossible to get a handle on what's going on, and it's kind of frightening. And I'm not saying the paintings are frightening. They have a very positive effusion of particles in all of these paintings, and they're just all based on what I call monumental forms, whether it's a house or a tower or whatever. And this is what's in the studio now. This is what I'll be showing this summer. Some of this, you know, typically, how could this boat ever work? It's called erratic cargo. And something happened here. And then there's a bunch of drawings. I've been drawing like mad, large-scale drawings of this same kind of subject matter. This was influenced by, I just came back from Vietnam. There's a citadel in Hue that was fantastic. I took some of that. And then, that's a recent one. That's me, and that's it.
Thank you, Dick. Any questions from the audience while I go to turn this up?
Thank you both. That was fascinating. I don't know if this is on. Okay. Who fabricated, or how were the sculptures fabricated if you did all the designs and stuff like the mural in California and those giant sculptures that he installed all over the world?
The mural, we hired a set construction company that does like movies. Those big sculptures are sent to metal fabricators. I don't remember even who that was, but everything was farmed out, really, pretty much, especially sculpture. It was really, we had no facility to do that. We could draw them, we couldn't build them.
I want to ask a question. Is that okay? Okay. You mentioned sort of resistance from the local government when you first came here. And I just want to sort of get into that further. And yeah, can you speak on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I've been on a number of boards here, all, you know, like the Aspen Community School, the Aspen Anderson Ranch, the museum, obviously, the art base down in the Salt, and now I'm on with a group called Teague down in Willits, where we did a thing called The Temporary, which just closed today. Yeah. And super successful, and you know, we just had an issue with a landlord, and so we're moving on, and we're gonna build a building. But even every one of those organizations, especially Teague, certainly the museum, there was just total blowback in terms of government seeing what was possible. It's like they don't trust you when you go before a city council. You sort of have to earn that, and I get that a bit, but you know, when you go with a really talented group of people from your community and you're asking just to go to the next step, and you know, you get buried in nonsense, it's disappointing. And that's just the way it is. So, you know, when you vote, ask them if they're interested in art. I'm serious, it just seems beyond them sometimes to understand what, you know, a community group can do. Now, there's been lots of examples of community groups not working out, and that happens, but you're not gonna have anything if you don't take a chance. So, I think government just has to be pushed, I really do. And if you take it to the national level, forget it, man, they're dismantling everything. So it's up to us to do something about that.
Dickie, a two-part question. When you were working with Herbert, did he ever talk much about his inspiration and his working process and what inspired him and what he was aiming for? And did he ever reflect on the great contradiction coming from World War Germany to Aspen in a time of pretty wild hedonistic delight?
As far as his inspiration, I think everything he did in his life inspired him. If you look, I mean, I honestly think if you just get a book and look through it, it's incredible the range of work, you know? I mean, all artists progress and you can see change and stuff, some more than others, but man, he was all over the place and did pretty good quality work. And the time it would take to do that. So I can't tell you what inspired him specifically, but I saw the result of it every day. You know, this is what we're going to do. This is what I just drew. This is what we're going to paint. This is a sculpture we're going to build. Yeah. So to answer that part of your question, I just saw it. I don't know if I knew where it came from, but he was always curious, always. What was the other part? Oh, yes. Well, so Bayer left the Bauhaus in 28, and he went into private practice in Berlin, advertising, and at that time, pretty much everybody had fled the Bauhaus. There was the last iteration with Mies van der Rohe that lasted briefly, but the Nazis were coming down on anything that looked left of center. And the Bauhaus was certainly that. They were out there. And so I guess they felt threatened by that, and so he didn't leave Germany right away. Most everybody else, I believe, did. And, you know, that's something else, talking about immigration. The Bauhaus scattered to the four winds, and they all landed in different countries, or a lot of them came here, but they landed in Spain, they landed in Israel, they landed in all over the place, and became super important to those countries in their cultural output. And if you go to Israel today, they probably have the biggest collection of Bauhaus architecture anywhere. Haifa has something like 4,000 Bauhaus-inspired buildings. But Herbert didn't leave right away. I think he enjoyed his job. There's always been some concern about him working on projects that had something to do with the Nazis, advertising. And I don't think he left until it got so bad. He had a Jewish daughter. He was worried about his wife. He hung on longer. And, you know, there's a lot of speculation about why, how, who. But having spent a lot of time with him, I can just say that he was like a bulldog about projects and working was everything. I don't know what he would have done if he couldn't have worked. You know, was that kind of guy? I mean, I can take a vacation. I don't know that he could. And so there's questions about that for sure, about his relationship to some of the advertising he did. Yeah. The New York Times just did an article on it. Anything else?
He called that period from 28 to 38 his advertising purgatory. That was very cool.
Well, that was 10 years. And he did some great work. He really revolutionized advertising and graphic design during that period. So, yeah, I know. I've talked to other people about this, and the only thing I can answer about that is he's like a bulldog. He was ADD. He loved working, and he couldn't imagine not working and loved the challenge. So, you know, maybe he should have left Germany 5 years earlier. I don't know. Bob?
When he was building houses here, were you working on those as well?
No.
No?
No, but we know that he built some pretty good houses here. I think when I first worked for Bayer, one of the guys I worked with construction said, "You're working for that guy? He's the guy that wanted to paint all the houses blue in town." Which, I don't know if it was just blue, but he did create a program where they offered to paint anybody's house. They provide the paint and paint the house if you would go along with it. I mean, that's a little more than utopian, but yeah, that didn't go over well. Yeah. No, but I didn't work in any residences. No. Anybody else?
I'm wondering about the relationship between Herbert and Fritz. They were brothers-in-law, were they not? They married sisters.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about the artistic or professional relationship between the two men working as architects here, or at least part-time for Herbert and here in Aspen.
Well, it was a situation where Herbert would design things, and like many cases, Fritz would be the architect of record and would probably do most of the mechanical work and on-site stuff. I think that was the relationship. But they got along great. The sisters got along great. They were all extreme characters. Joella Bayer and Fabi Benedict were out there, man. They were really, really strange women. But their mother was the futurist poet Minna Loy. And then Joella was married to Julian Levy, who was an art dealer in New York in the 30s, who brought all the surrealists to America. Everybody came and worked with Julian Levy. And they all eventually left him because, God bless him, he thought they were selling the work for too much. A dealer, imagine. Yeah. So yeah, that was a really, they all got along pretty well from what I could tell. You know, there was a really clubby thing going on here in the 50s. Yeah.
Okay, I get to ask the last question. Just after all of this sort of self-reflection and this has been a journey for you, and it's really amazing to be able to honor you and the role that you've played in the history of the arts in Aspen. We're so grateful. But now looking back on everything, what do you think is the greatest legacy moving forward that we should hold on to in Aspen, of whether what you learned from either from Herbert Bayer or from the Bauhaus? You know, as we're talking about the Bauhaus incessantly, or I'm talking about it incessantly, what are the things that, you know, if we're going to walk away and be able to think about one principle or something? I'm putting you on the spot. I'm sorry.
There's a couple of things. Actually, community involvement, that would be a big thing. You know, like this museum wouldn't be here if 3 crazy people didn't think we could bully the city council. Right on.
God, you did.
I felt the same way about what I did at the community school. Started the first auction, which moved to the Anderson Ranch. That auction is now, and it's like, I don't know, 40th year or something. It's a lot better there than it was at the community school, I'll say that. And then what we're doing down Valley right now with the arts campus at Willits, you know, it's great. I would just say people should get involved. I mean, it's your community. If you just let what's going on right now bulldoze us, we're going to be fucked, man. It's just...
On that note,